Welcome to the 6th episode of the Free Spirit Academy podcast with eating psychology expert and body image mentor, Uhrich. Free Spirit Academy is about you being fully you. My name is Randy Moss, and I'm an eating psychology coach and Kundalini yoga teacher, bringing you conversations about freedom from rigid diets, painful body image, and never-ending cycles of self-help and self-improvement. This is about honoring our own bodies and our purest self-expression. Welcome to the podcast. As a heads up, this interview did take place a couple of years ago, originally on my YouTube channel, and actually it was the first interview I ever did. And it's so good, and like all the interviews, all 4 of them that I did over there, I wanted to bring it to you here. So before I officially met Lou, I stalked her on Instagram, like you do. I couldn't get enough of her bold, clear, body-loving, shame-softening words of wisdom. And she is one of the most unusual women I've ever met in that she actually grew up without painful body image issues. And I think I mentioned a few episodes back that there was a time in my life where I just assumed that all female people wanted to lose weight and were trying to lose weight. And I didn't think about male people, apparently, but my shock in hearing a friend say that she wasn't trying to lose weight really shook up my paradigm. So Lou is one of these unicorns. Her story is also fascinating because she developed disordered eating and self-abuse and body dysmorphia as an adult, and today you'll hear that story. And what I relate to most with Lou's journey is this idea that the body could be doing something other than it should be doing. To both of us, when we were hypnotized by having the perfect diet and the perfect body, or I should say perfect in quotes, were completely baffled when our bodies responded negatively. And instead of looking at the body's response as a message, we made ourselves and our bodies wrong. And instead of looking at our dietary approach as needing questioning, we questioned ourselves, figuring, we must be doing something wrong. And in my case, so in all of my years of trying to obsessively cleanse and detox and lose weight, I berated my body for ever being hungry and for not losing weight when I thought it should and not having energy when I thought it should. I was looking at my body as wrong rather than listening and backing off and taking a closer look on my aggressive approach. I had such romantic ideas about what being a free spirit looked like. I thought I should only need to eat these bird-like quantities and float through my day feeling like perpetual magic. And while I still hold space for my body to experience all the magic that's available, I have in no way lowered my standards in the magic department. I've learned to be with my body now and not to make her wrong. So back to Lou. Today we'll talk about what it's like to develop an eating disorder later in life, how she reached for control with food when her life felt out of control, the health issues she developed when she stopped listening to her body and started forcing it, the letter she wrote to her scale before literally smashing it, and the difference between trying to make a relationship with the scale work versus a relationship with yourself. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Lou. I want to open this by bringing up your tagline, which I love. On your website, you say, I help women be who they are and eat what they want in a body they love. And I assume that means, and I know, but our listeners don't know, that you had a time when you did not love your body so much. And I would love to hear about that journey and also what led up to that journey, because I find that part particularly interesting and unusual.
Yeah, sure. So, yep, you got it right. My tagline is be who you are and eat what you want in a body you love. And for most of my life, that's what I did. I grew up loving my body, feeling really secure and at home in it. I felt like it was the perfect place for me. And I grew up in a family and in a home environment with my parents and my siblings where body wasn't really looked at as a way to dictate your worth or that something you had to present to the world in a certain way. And so I never felt like my body was representative of me in the sense that I had to perfect it or make it look a certain way. I always just thought my body carried me and it was functional and here for me to do fun things and exciting things and acts of service in, instead of something that I had to control or manipulate or some way present in a manner that would help people to accept me or to be right or any other identifier with my body. I didn't have that. So I grew up really healthy in terms of my body and my body image. And I was active in ways that I enjoyed, but I wasn't really super into working out or anything like that. And I also wasn't into a specific way of eating or nutrition. I just ate what I wanted, as much as I wanted, stopped when I was full. I certainly experimented here and there with different ways of eating, but not in any way having to do with my body at all. I think there was a season where I was like, I love animals, so I'm not eating them. I think a lot of teenagers go through that, and that was a part of my story too. But other than that, I ate what I wanted. And when I wanted it, when I didn't want it, I didn't eat it, hence the vegetarian phase for a little bit. And I moved my body when and how I wanted. And that continued through puberty and dating and all those times when a lot of people and women in particular, girls in particular, struggle. I did not. I didn't. Going away to college and that infamous freshman 15, I have no idea what that is. I, walked to and from class. I only worked out when I had to at the time because we had a required gym credit for college. So I remember doing that and kind of begrudgingly hitting the gym for that class because it wasn't really a part of my daily life before that. And I went to the cafeteria and ate cafeteria food and just lived my life without really thinking much about it. Continued on in that process, eventually found and took a liking to working out here and there with some college roommates. But again, it wasn't anything where I was driven to do it or compelled to do it to manipulate my body, or didn't really have anything to do with my body at all. It had to do with hanging out with my friends who were college athletes, and that was a place they hung out. And so if I wanted to hang out with my roommates, my friends, then that's where I went. Still healthy with eating, when I was engaged and getting married, and again in a season where a lot of people are doing bridal boot camps and trying to slim down to fit into a dress. I didn't go through that. I didn't have that experience, and I just wore a dress that I really liked and trusted that when it fit me in the store, it would fit me 9 months later, and it did, and enjoyed my wedding without any implications about my body or who I was as a person. And
I'm going to interrupt you there for a second because I'm curious if you realized how unusual you were, because it's sad that this is so abnormal, but you sound like the crazy person in all of this, because I see that everybody around you, I'm sure, was, because you have to tell this story as in because it's unusual. You have to tell it because it's unusual, because the assumption is that we hate our bodies, that we're dieting, that we're doing bridal boot camps. Did you realize how unusual you were?
Not a clue. I had no idea how unusual I am. I'm not sure if that's because the group of women that I spent most of my time with, none of them really struggled with food and body either, or if they did, they didn't share it. So I think that at this point in my life, and obviously in the work we do, I would be remiss to say none of them struggled. But I do think that if they did it very secretively, and I was oblivious to it, maybe partially because it wasn't something that I had experienced. So I had no frame of reference for oh, that's disordered eating behavior, or ooh, they said that. I wonder if they're not happy with their body or they're struggling with body image. That just wasn't on my radar. And so if someone close to me was struggling with it, I had no clue. I can say for sure that my closest friends, the ones I spent day in and day out with, had very similar outlooks on movement and eating as I did, which was a lot of freedom around it and just no obsession, no disordered behaviors or thoughts, at least that I could see. And we spent a lot of time together. So I think maybe partially the people that I was with and being in that environment where it wasn't happening. And then as I extend out, I would say roommates or close friends, but not my best friends who I spent time with, I just didn't pick up on it. I'm sure some of them now looking back are struggling at the time. And I do know, for instance, one person has reached out to me now that this is my line of work and said, hey, back then I actually was struggling. here's my story. So I do know that it was happening, but I was oblivious to it. And that continued. I got married, I got pregnant, I gained 50 some pounds during pregnancy, and it was fun and it was exciting. And I didn't think much about losing that weight or the way that my body changed. And I just let it do its thing. And eventually my body went back to its happy, healthy place without very much input from me at all. I was too distracted at that point with babies. We had adopted our first, and our second was our birth child. And so I already had 2 kids at home to be taken care of, and I couldn't be like freaking out about my body. It wasn't just even something that was a thought in my mind. And so I really just let even that stage of life come and go for me. And again, no clue. Like I had no clue that people struggled so much with weight during these certain milestones in life, because I just didn't. And so, yes, now I know how rare it is. But at the time, no, I didn't. I didn't really. Go ahead.
Do you attribute that to your parents, like the way that you were raised? Because I feel like even women whose mothers at least try to present an image of being happy with their body or not dieting still fall into the general cultural, expectations for themselves. So do you feel like your parents did something differently? Do you feel like you came into this world just magically bright, shiny, and oblivious, and it wouldn't have mattered what your parents did?
No, I do think that my upbringing greatly contributed to me not focusing on my body, because my parents and my family members didn't focus on their body. They were always focused on us as people. We spent, time weekly having critical thinking discussions where we were asking questions and sharing ideas. And this was usually like Sunday afternoons. Our family would just get together and talk. And so those are the things I remember. And those are the things I remember shaping me. And they had nothing to do with my body. So, while some people might have felt like they were shaped by, they could eat this and they couldn't eat that, and foods were restricted, or even parents teaching them certain disordered food and exercise behaviors. That was not a part of my life. We were active. My dad coached sports for my brother, which we went to a lot. I was a dancer and ran track. My sister was an athlete and a D1 college athlete. And so, being active was a part of our family. Food was a time for all of us to get together. We always had Sunday afternoon meals together, and also found it really important to eat together throughout the week. And I come from a blended family. So I have, a mom, a birth dad, a stepmom. They're all my parents. I look at them and respect them equally and love them all so much. And of the 3 of them, none of them really had any sort of disordered thinking or conversations or teachings that I picked up on in terms of my body. There were so many other things we were concentrating on. I remember them focusing on my writing and my art and who I was as a person, and not really focusing on my body. And so I never focused on my body. And I think that's probably a lot where it comes from. I also didn't really love TV that much, to be honest. So I wasn't around the media all the time. I loved art. I loved photography. So I definitely, would leaf through magazines, popular magazines at the time, like take out all these pictures, beautiful artsy pictures in fashion magazines. But I never was looking at them from this place of like, this is a body that I need to aspire to. It's just like, wow, this is really beautiful art, this dress or this photography. And so, yeah, I know I was around things and I know I was exposed to it, but it just wasn't on my radar at the time.
It blows my mind.
It blows mine too now, doing what we do. It blows mine.
Right. So what you do now obviously had a sort of something that prompted you to want to do this work.
Right. So this is the twist in my story, is that after all these milestones, after all these seasons, when if I was going to have disordered eating and exercise issues, you'd think that they would have already occurred. I ended up doing a popular fitness program. It was a 3-month program, and I did it with my husband, and we are teammates. We love doing things together. And so it was just really simple. If he was going to do it, I was too. And I thought, well, this is a cool opportunity to, just get fit or get healthy, or all those things we equate with a fitness program that may or may not actually be a part of a fitness program. And in my case was the opposite. But I had all these ideas in my head of like, oh yeah, I'll do this. I mean, this was after I had run a half marathon. I had participated in other races, and like they came and they went and it was no big deal. But with this particular program, aside from the rigorous workouts, was a meal plan. And I really grasped onto it. It certainly was a season in my life where we were having some family medical issues, and I was, holding a lot together and being really responsible. So I do think there were some control elements in there that it just made the perfect storm for this fitness program where I could, kind of translate some of that control and some of those feelings of out of control when things were going crazy with my family's health. Both my husband and my daughter, I could kind of say, okay, well, at least I can control my body, or at least I can control my food. And I'm sure that was a part of it too, but mix that rigorous exercise with a meal plan. And sure, did I, lose weight? Would I have been, the model of the before and after photo? Most certainly. I was a normal average size beforehand, according to BMI, which I'm sure we'll get into later, but I'm not a huge fan of. So I was average for my height and totally had maintained a weight ever since I was, I think, in the 9th grade, even, after my pregnancy and everything, went back to it. No big deal. So I was already healthy at my set point weight, doing fine. And I still would have been the classic before and after picture, because how many of those are you like, oh gosh, that was there before, you know how it is. And so, but I would have been the classic because before, I was long and lean, sure. But after I had the 6-pack and I had such minimal body fat that you could see, my chiseled arms and shoulders and, the muscles in my legs, and I didn't have an ass anymore, but I also didn't have half of my head of hair, and I didn't have my period, and my thyroid hormones and my sex hormones had just gone berserk, and I was sick, and in so many ways, both mentally and psychologically, but also physically sick. And that was all a result of just one diet for me. And it turned into disordered eating and movement for a very long time. So I did 1 3-month program. And after that, my husband, who again, was partnered with me, was like, all right, that was cool. See you later. And I was stuck. And so I constantly felt like I had to keep up that meal plan. And when that meal plan wasn't producing results anymore with the workouts, then I amped up my workouts. And then I took down my calories and continued to villainize or vilify fat or carbs or whatever it was, sugar, and I just tried until I cut my calories to a very, very low amount. And my exercise was at an all-time high where I was just running half marathons on the weekend in addition to rigorous workouts, just trying to do anything to get on top. And by on top, I meant keeping up this momentum of weight loss that I had seen. And what ended up happening was weight loss was absolutely stalled, but my body was desperate. And so I developed binge eating disorder as a result of the extreme restriction and struggled with that for a very, very, very long time before finally coming out of it.
Well, and it's ironic that you got into it and ended up losing hair and all this stuff. When did you start to attribute the health issues to what you were doing?
Yeah, at first I didn't. I was in denial, which I think a lot of people are when they go through this. They're like, oh, I'm feeling fine. I have so much energy. We diet for a certain period of time and we think that we're feeling great and it's making us feel better. And there's this element of truth to that because of the hormones that working out releases. It's actually stress hormones and starving release these stress hormones that at first make us feel good, right? Because we have to at least feel energized enough to finally find the food or find what we need to feel better. So that there's this peak of feeling great and having these endorphins and feeling awesome to dieting. But what happens next is it starts to deteriorate. And we keep living that old story that dieting makes us feel better and that eating less has really made us feel good. And so then your joints start hurting and you start having insomnia and you don't have a period, or you have really horrible periods, really painful periods, or whatever it is. And so for me, that's kind of what it was, where I was like, oh, I'm feeling so great. I've never felt so good in my life. And my pants are falling off, so I must be healthy, And I just thought I was doing fine and that my body was just a little like freaked out because again, I've never ever dieted before, like never counted a calorie, never looked at the back of a package. So I was just like, oh, I just probably freaked my body out a little bit. Like it just doesn't know what to think, but it'll pick back up. Like that was my thought, like it'll pick back up. And then I'm like 3 years in without having a period. And so many other things have gone wrong. I've had insomnia. My estrogen was testing at like a super low level to the point where I was in premature menopause in my late 20s. And I was being tested for Lyme disease and all these other things because of my joints. But at the same time, I had developed this binge eating disorder. And I think it wasn't until the binging started that I was like, whoa, something is really wrong here. And maybe I have a problem. Because, you know, when you are keeping up with the cultural ideals of like being thin and being quote unquote healthy and doing the supposedly right things, it's really easy to tell yourself the lie that you're good, you're fine, you're healthy, this is the way it's supposed to be. But once the switch flips to the binge eating, all of a sudden you feel the shame, you feel the guilt, you feel like something's wrong and you want something to be wrong because it's shameful to eat, supposedly. You shouldn't be eating, you know, sugary foods or carby foods or fat-laden foods, right? So when that happens, all of a sudden, you know, our ears prick to this idea that like maybe we have a problem, but when we're following the cultural norms of skinny at all costs, it's easy to overlook. And so that was the case for me, for sure.
Well, I think you've done something really good too. That I definitely believe this. We hang on to this story of, oh, well, I felt so good when, and then when you start binge eating or things aren't working the same way, you still hold on to that story like, but this is the best I've ever felt, so something must be wrong with me. So I think it's a mix of that and the stress hormones, like you said, and also the hope of what's to come, like that excitement in the beginning of, oh, I'm going to be this, my body is going to be this, and we can run on the fumes of that and we can run ourselves into the ground.
Right.
It reminds me, interestingly, of the Minnesota starvation experiment, which for anybody who doesn't know it, you can Google it and find out some really interesting things about this study they did with these healthy, youngish men. I don't know exactly what year it was. Do you? In the 70s or 80s?
I don't remember. It was during the Vietnam War, and they were starving these men to test what happens when they're in war-torn countries and they're prisoners of war. And these were conscientious objectors.
Yeah, all very well intended, and these men were healthy, and they cut their calories down to like 1,600. My details aren't exactly right, but it's something that would be a common number that people would diet on today. And these healthy men started thinking about food all of the time, started having these like crazy mood swings, started reading cookbooks for fun, started thinking about like how they wanted to go into, you know, food for work. They wanted to be chefs now. And it makes me think of all of us women, the women that go on diets, and the way that we suddenly become preoccupied with food, or we start binging and we suddenly think that something's wrong with us rather than something being wrong with the program that we've been given. So that's a lot of why I wanted to ask you about this, is to sort of dispel the myth that there's anything wrong with us because we can't stick to a diet.
No.
So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And up to you, was there to miss anything?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously I'm not there anymore. Probably the listeners or the viewers would want to know that what happened with me after several years of struggling with binge eating disorder and feeling physically ill and mentally ill, I eventually got help. I hired a coach, and it wasn't without some resistance from me, but a lot of support from my husband, who really considered it wise and was willing to just tell me how valuable I was by making that investment in a coach who really helped to guide me to the biggest transition I think I've ever had in my life, and turning that corner from this season of disordered eating to becoming even more aware and even more awake and even more alive when it comes to the way that I view food in my body than I think I ever was before. You know, I think I had a pretty oblivious relationship with food in my body. It was as though those things didn't exist in my childhood and my teen and college years. And now I have such a huge respect and a huge love and adoration for the way the body works and for how food can serve the body in so many different ways, from nutrition and nourishment to pleasure and all the things in between, that this was a great experience for me, even though it was one of the lowest points of my life. It has led me to this wonderful place where I got the help I needed. I received mentoring and I got certified, and now I've opened a practice and work with women every day who have had experiences like I have, and I help them to walk through and get out on the other side too. So my story has a very happy ending, which I think is great to note, but I would say it's not like I went back to where I was before. I'm not oblivious anymore. I'm not clueless to the issues that are out there with food and body, or clueless to my own food and body. I'm very much a respecter now and a lover now of both food and this awesome body that I get to live in here and experience life in on earth. So it's a great end to the story.
Yeah. Oh no, it's amazing. So would you say rather that you're better off for having gone through all of this than you had just gone on your merry way, being the unusual human that you were to begin with?
Yes, there's not really anything in my life that I regret having happened to me, because it's always such a learning experience. But this is one thing for sure. I'm really glad that it happened. It was totally worth it.
And obviously made such an impact that you've made it your work.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I want to read several snippets from my favorite post that you've ever written. And it's called Dear Scale, where you actually write a letter to your scale. So the scale that we step on and weigh ourselves on. And I'm just going to dig into it. This letter is so cool. So speaking to the scale, you said, "Though you were the cold and silent type, I faithfully sought your approval, waiting upon your flashing black numbers to validate my existence and measure my value. A low weight, at or below an impersonal and culturally dictated goal, meant good days, more smiles, a daily allowance of bread or other indulgences, and a temporary peace of mind. High numbers, above society's worked ideals of health and beauty, meant horrible days, frustration, mood swings, calorie deficits, and compulsive mirror checks to pinpoint exactly where those extra pounds were gathering. My stomach, always my stomach. That space below my belly button and above my underwear line was home to the pounds that separated me from perfection. It was the space that kept me from loving you, and the space that kept me from loving myself. If only a few inches would go, I thought, then you'd have something nice to say for once. Then I'd feel worthy. Then we'd find love. As you know, we never did find it, but still I tried to make our relationship work. God knows I tried." So I think so many can relate to this, that relationship with the scale that completely dictates how we feel about our day. Feel fabulous, like you said, step on the scale, and all of a sudden your day is shot. So what would you say is the difference between trying to make a relationship with the scale work versus actually trying to make a relationship with your body work?
That's a really good question, Randy. And I think for me, it all comes down to where the power lies. So when you're trying to make a relationship with your scale work, the scale has all the power. The numbers are what dictate, like my blog post says, whether you're happy or you're sad, what you can eat and what you can't, how you can live and operate throughout that day. Can you rest? Can you not? Like, the scale is what has the ultimate power over the way that you live your life and over the way that you feel about self. Whereas if you're working on a relationship with your body, you get to have that power. You get to determine for yourself what is attractive. You get to determine for yourself, obviously, with your body, with your feelings, with all of your whole person. You get to decide what feels right for you, what tastes good, and what would be most nourishing and nutritious for you in terms of movement and relationships and food and all of those things. You get to have the power. You get to have a say. It's a two-sided relationship when you're working on the relationship between self and body. But when you're working on the relationship between self and scale, you're putting all of that power into an inanimate object that really doesn't tell you much but your gravitational pull. Like, it really doesn't say very much of anything. Certainly doesn't say, your worth, who you are as a person, your talents, your gifts, and the way that people feel about you, the way you make others feel, and how you are, as a whole person. it only can tell you your weight, your poundage. And so I think you're putting a lot of power in something that's way too simplified to, encompass the whole human experience. But when you're working on a relationship with your body, it's so multifaceted, so beautiful, and so just fun and mysterious that it's a much more pleasurable experience for sure. And also much more rewarding.
What do you say to a woman for whom words like pleasure and mystery are terrifying, and she feels powerful when she knows the number on the scale? And as long as she knows the number on the scale, she's okay. Or at least she feels like she's okay.
Yeah. I'd tell her probably something she wouldn't want to hear, but it's false power. She's been tricked. Are you really a power, or are you a slave to, besides the inanimate object, a cultural influence and influences that have dictated what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, these very strict parameters and boundaries by which you should live by. So if you feel that your power is abiding by this cultural standard, these dictates, I would question whether you actually have any power at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Sometimes not so fluffy.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Like sometimes my words and just my reactions aren't so fluffy, but it's the truth, like sometimes it just takes that brutal honesty. I would feel for her, but I would tell her she's disillusioned for sure. Like, it's not true.
Right. Well, if feeling freedom in our experience was easy or fluffy, a lot more of us would be feeling it and experiencing it, I think. Right. So you didn't actually just break up with your scale. You actually physically broke your scale. And I want to read the last part. I'm skipping to the end, but you guys should totally go read the whole post. And I will post a link at the bottom of the video here. At the end of your post, you say, scales are absolutely unnecessary. They do nothing to evaluate our physical, mental, or emotional health. Which, by the way, I also want to say is also true for the before and after pictures that you talked about.
Right.
Before and after pictures say anything about who the person in the after picture is or what their experience is. Anyways, they are not indicators of our worth nor our well-being. The first time I stepped on my scale, I was innocently hoping to measure my progress in a fitness program. The last time I stepped on it was years later after becoming completely obsessive about my weight and food and eventually turning the corner towards recovery. The scale is not a friend, a doctor, a coach, nor a god. It is a machine that computes a person's gravitational pull, and quite inaccurately, depending on the slope of your tile or the precision of the calibration. It has been, at the time that you wrote this, one glorious year since I've weighed myself. One whole year of giving up the struggle, and the irony is I'm healthier and happier than I've ever been. So if you go to this post, you'll see pictures of you smashing the scale physically. How did that feel? Was that like, liberation? Or like, were you just trying to get a cool picture? Or like, what was the whole experience?
It felt really good. It felt really significant. It took a lot for me to ever get to the point where, you're already recovering for quite some time for most people before they can give up the scale. So it took a lot for me in terms of recovery and mindset to even get to the point where I tucked it in the back of my closet and would not take it out again to get on, because certainly there were times in my life where I was like, well, this is doing me no good. I'm going to put it away. But a week later, 10 days later, I was getting back on it 2 or 3 times a day to check myself, and to right my wrongs. And so it took a lot for me even to get to the point I had already come so far before I even could put it in my closet and never take it out again. So it was just very celebratory and just meant so much to me when I was able to smash it and say that I had been without it for a year, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, I never needed it again. Like to this day, there's no scale in our home. I do not weigh myself. I don't care to weigh myself. I am the healthiest and happiest that I've ever been. And still, even more so probably than when I wrote that post. And it's no thanks to a scale. The scale is not anything that made that possible. What made it possible was me and the personal growth and evolution that I've gone through. And I just don't need to give my power away to a scale. So for me, breaking it was ceremonial and celebratory and so much fun.
So what about somebody who is nowhere near being able to break up with their scale, let alone break their scale? Do you feel like it's healthy to have somebody transition away? Like, could you just put your scale in the closet for a day, or just come down to weighing yourself once a week? Like, how do you work with somebody who's just not ready to not know what they weigh yet? But they're ready to start making steps, you know, to get real power back, like you said.
Yeah. Well, when I work with my clients, it's all about introspection and experimentation and getting to know themselves better. So certainly, if they're used to weighing themselves every hour on the hour, then we just try to put it away for 2 or 3 hours. And then we reflect on how that felt and where, you know, what feelings came up, what was our reaction, where did we feel resistant to it, where did we feel relieved by it, you know, things like that. And then maybe after we have that information, we can go further to 6 hours or a whole day and just continue to take it incrementally based on the feedback that they are getting through their whole person, you know, in terms of resistance and joy and relief and all of the many emotions that they will go through when they're letting go of a relationship like that they thought meant something. And of course, we can't just get rid of the scale in a vacuum. There's a whole lot more that has to be done in terms of dealing with fat phobia and really starting to understand health at every size and getting rid of some of the lies and ideas that we have accepted as truth around bodies and shape, size, weight, and what that dictates. And so there's a lot more to it, obviously, than just getting rid of the scale. I wouldn't advise someone doing that in a vacuum, you know, just with nothing else changing or no other input or information. But I certainly would just take it incrementally, one step at a time.
So you also wrote a post, it's right before this one that we were just talking about how your kids have I don't know if it's a day at school where they get weighed, something to do with like health class or something, and how you opted your kids out of that. And you had several solid reasons why. Why do you feel like that's better for them? How do you feel like it's impacting them? And then how did it impact the community?
Oh gosh, well, there's so many reasons why I did this, first of all, and why I think that it's important. Just to note, both of my kids that would have been weighed at the time who were school age have the privilege, and I don't use that lightly, they have the privilege because there is such thing as thin privilege. Being fat is stigmatized. And so they have the privilege of being thin. Had they stepped on that scale, their BMIs would have been average and normal. They wouldn't have gotten a slap on the wrist and a note home to mom and dad telling them that there was a problem that needed to be dealt with. They wouldn't have gotten, a shake of the head or a quick pen by the nurse, writing something down as they stepped through the assembly line of kids weighing themselves on a scale. They wouldn't have had that experience. And yet still, I thought that just one is a statement, but two, just as a simple practice of being a forerunner in this area and saying no and seeing, what the community response would be. It was really important for me to not have my kids weighed, because at the end of the day, it wasn't about what was going to happen to them and what the results would be for them, but just the general idea of this fight against obesity and the, obesity task force that's happening in schools these days, which the BMI calculation is one of the things that public schools are doing now to combat this really scary thing called obesity, which I'm being totally sarcastic for those of you who don't know me and might not yet be read up on some of the science and research coming out about health and fat and what really are the implications, much less than what we think. So anyway, I just didn't want to be a part of it, didn't want to participate in it. And the whole idea of it, for several reasons, really turned me off. One is that kids are already bullied and stigmatized very much based on size and body shape. It's something that happens all the time. And so I didn't want to participate in a culture and in a day where my kids would and all the other kids at school would either be afraid to be fat or ashamed of having fat. Those were the two options really, right? You're afraid of what is it going to say? Is it going to be right? right or wrong. What does that have to do with anything? But those are sort of, that's sort of the idea. They get lined up, they take their shoes off, they go through this line, they get weighed, and then they go back to class and talk about it. And so I knew close family friends who had kids, little boys, who were ashamed that they didn't weigh as much as the other boys in their class. They were too little. This whole idea we have about big, strong men, this, gender stereotype, and they didn't fit it. And so they were ashamed of that. And then girls who were ashamed of weighing as much as some of the boys in their class or more, or, just weighing more than other girls in their class, and having tears and coming home upset and ashamed of that. So on all sides of the spectrum, there was shame involved in something that I don't know why we're bringing into the schools anyway. It really isn't indicative of health, the BMI. Certainly, if we are going to talk health, then let's get our kids to, physicians and, practitioners who can have a whole picture in terms of lab tests and blood tests and health history, not just stepping on a scale at school with a school nurse and writing a letter home based on that. Let's teach our kids to plant gardens and learn about nourishment and nutrition and learn about stress and all the things that go into that. Let's certainly not send home a letter saying your kid is overweight and needs to be on a diet, because diets don't work. And girls are like 300 girls who diet in high school and middle school are 324 times more likely to gain weight than girls who don't do that, and already we have like 8 and 10-year-old girls who are binge eating and dieting and restricting. And I see it a lot. I work a lot with women, but I also work with mamas of children and teenagers sometimes. And so I've seen all this stuff firsthand, and it's not something that I wanted to be complicit in or participate in with my children.
So for people who are hearing you say things like BMI is not necessarily indicative of health, and, the science and stuff that we feel like we know isn't what we think it is. Are there any resources that you would point people towards? Any books? I know you mentioned like Health at Every Size, which is a great book by Linda Bacon. Is there anything else that you would point people towards that would sort of reassure them in this area?
I mean, definitely take a moment to listen or read Linda Bacon whenever you can. She's on several podcasts that do a great job of just displaying her amazing work and all that she has done for this movement of Health at Every Size, which, yes, is also a book. She also has another book called Body Respect. Harriet Brown wrote a book called Body of Truth, which is also really good and eye-opening when it comes to weight and fat stigma and the health implications and what they are and what they're not. And even the more cultural and media pushed and pharmaceutical company inspired reasons why we have so vilified and demonized fat and higher weights. And so those are great resources. Of course, again, just you can hop on iTunes and type in Linda Bacon's name or Health at Every Size or Harriet Brown and see where they come up and kind of take a listen to them, or you can read their books for sure. That's a great way to start getting an idea of this whole misconception we've had around fat and health and what the connection there is and what it's not. I also love Virgie Tovar, who is a fat activist and just an amazing voice in the body positive, fat positive community. And I think Isabel Fox and Duke does a good job too. So those are our resources. I would say just eat it all up, get everything you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, my work is very much about figuring out how it is that you want to feel. Because we live in such a culture of, we do things for how it's going to make us look. We eat this because it's going to make our skin glow, or it's because it's going to make us lose weight. We eat this because, or we move this way because it's going to make the number on the scale go down. And we're looking for all of these external markers. And I like to help people get in touch with how they want to feel. Like for myself, I want to feel free and I want to feel magical and I just want to feel like giddy and wonderful and alive and energetic in my body. And so the desire for those feelings motivates the way that I eat and the way that I move and the way that I take care of myself. What would you say that is for you? How is it that you like to feel in your body, in your life, and how does that inform the way that you eat, move, and care for yourself?
The word that comes to mind right away for me is alive. I want to feel alive. You know, life is really sacred and special, and it's fleeting. And so for me to feel fully alive in every moment is very, very important to me. And that does influence the way that I eat for sure. We have a huge garden at our house, and so I love to do farm to table style. We just go out in our garden and pick butternut squash or broccoli or onions or whatever it is, and just it's so fresh. It just came from the earth, and then I get to eat it. I love that. I think that's really, really fun. And I also love feeling alive because of celebration or pleasure or drinking like a really good microbrew. I love craft beer. And so those are the kind of things that make me feel alive when I get to enjoy those special tastes and flavors, and also the fun and the spirit of the company I'm with. And eating in community is something that makes me feel very alive. So once a week, we do a family dinner with our family and our best friends and their families. So we're getting really outnumbered. It's 4 adults and 6 kids at this point, but it's so much fun. And we bring food. One family takes the meal, one family takes dessert. We have drinks and fun and just enjoy each other's company. It gets really, really loud because, like I said, there's 6 kids, but that brings me to life and makes me so happy. And it's part of my eating experience that I incorporate at least on a weekly basis. And so I love, breaking bread and sharing a table with people for sure. Food and that's the way I would say food makes me feel alive. Movement and exercise. I love being outside. I like to be in life to feel alive when I'm moving. So I love walking in nature and taking hikes and climbing mountains and just being outside in the sunshine, breathing the fresh air. That's where I certainly most feel alive. And then when it comes to life and relationships and the people I spend time with, I just want to laugh. I want to have joy and experience fun. That's what makes me feel really alive. And, all of the emotions make me feel alive. So I always, of course, I'm a happy person. I love to giggle. I'm silly and goofy, but I also am really able to experience and dive deep into those other emotions too, that some people would label negative, but I think it's just par for the course of life. And so really allowing all of the emotions in my life is another way that I feel so very alive. But alive would be my word for sure.
Oh, thank you so much. 2 things that really stood out to me is, one, how you emphasized using food to make you feel alive, but that doesn't mean shouting the mantra like food is fuel, food is just fuel. Obviously, food is connection, and food is love, and food is all of these things, and it can be used for those things in really beautiful, healthy ways. And that you can take exquisite care of yourself and be really, really healthy and feel all of your emotions. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that you're super wonderful, happy all the time. Like, you can feel fully alive and be deeply saddened, because there is certainly a place for sadness and anger, and we need all of us at the table, not just bits of us, shiny, sparkly, happy, perfect parts of us. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And where can people find you, and what would you like people to know about your work?
Okay. People can find me at lueats.com. That's LUEATS.com. And then you should be able to find all of my social media handles there too. As Randy said, we connected via Instagram. It's where I love to spend a lot of my time. Now that it's turning into Snapchat, I'll probably spend even more of my time there with the new video stories too. But my Instagram handle is at LUEATSDOTCOM. So it's spelled out lueats.com. So you can find me there. And of course, my website. Right now, in the next few days, I'll be launching a free 5-day course called Finding Freedom, just to help get you on your way towards making peace with food in your body and unlocking your life and the joy in your life. And so that's something that I'll be offering for free. You'll find it on my website. You can sign up for my newsletter if you want to be the first to know when that's available. And right now I do have a few spaces open for private coaching, which are filling up fast, but that is
you so much for listening to this conversation. Before I wrap things up, I want to invite you to come join the private Free Spirit Academy Facebook group where I post videos, offer support, and answer questions on all things food and body freedom. And you'll also get a free copy of my ebook, The Eat to Feel Good Diet. I hope to see you there.